Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The bustling streets of Lagos hummed with life as the sun cast its golden rays on the sprawling city. Vendors lined the sidewalks, their voices blending into a vibrant symphony of commerce. Among the chaos of the city was a modest two-room apartment in a quiet neighborhood, where a young woman named Adanna was raising her only child, Precious. Adanna was the epitome of resilience. Widowed at a young age, she had been thrust into the role of sole provider and protector. Life had not been kind to her, but she refused to let its hardships define her. Her late husband, Chidi, had passed away in a tragic accident when Precious was just 2 years old. From that moment, Adanna vowed to give her daughter a life filled with love and opportunities, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. Adanna's determination. Adanna worked tirelessly as a seamstress, her fingers often raw from sewing intricate designs for wealthy clients. She was known in the community for her skill, and though her earnings were modest, she managed to keep her home running and ensure Precious never went to bed hungry. Her days began before sunrise. Adanna would rise quietly, light the kerosene lamp in the corner of their small kitchen, and begin her prayers. Her faith was the anchor that kept her grounded. Each morning, she prayed for strength, wisdom, and guidance to raise Precious in a world that often seemed indifferent to their struggles. After prayers, she would wake Precious with a gentle shake and a warm smile. "Wake up, my angel," she would say. "The world is waiting for you to shine." Precious would yawn and stretch, her young face lighting up at the sight of her mother. "Good morning, Mama," she'd reply, her voice filled with affection. A mother's love. Adanna was meticulous about instilling values in Precious. She taught her the importance of respect, kindness, and humility. "No matter where life takes you, my child," Adanna often said, "remember that your character is your greatest wealth." Precious absorbed these lessons like a sponge, her admiration for her mother growing with each passing day. She often watched Adanna so late into the night, her hands moving with practiced precision. "Mama, you work too hard," she would say, her young voice tinged with concern. Adanna would smile and stroke her daughter's hair. "I work hard because I want you to have a better life, my Precious. One day you'll understand." Life's challenges. Despite their strong bond, life was not without its challenges. Adanna struggled to pay Precious's school fees, often taking on extra sewing jobs to make ends meet. There were days when they had only Gary and groundnuts for dinner, but Adanna never let Precious see her despair. One evening, as they sat on their worn-out couch, Adanna held Precious close and said, "You are my greatest blessing. As long as we have each other, we can face anything." Precious nodded, her small hands clutching her mother's. "I'll make you proud, Mama. One day I'll take care of you." The bond that couldn't be broken. Their relationship was a partnership built on love, trust, and unwavering support. Adanna's determination to see Precious succeed drove her to make sacrifices that others might consider unthinkable. She declined invitations to social events and ignored her own needs to ensure Precious had everything she required. On Sundays, they attended church together, dressed in simple but neatly ironed clothes. The congregation often marveled at their closeness. Adanna's prayers were always for Precious, for her success, her happiness, and her safety. One Sunday, after a particularly moving sermon about perseverance, Adanna turned to Precious and said, "Remember, my child, life will not always be kind, but you must remain kind. The world needs more people with pure hearts." Precious nodded solemnly, her young mind etching the words into her memory. A glimpse of Precious's future. As Precious grew older, it became evident that she had inherited her mother's strength and determination. She excelled in school, often topping her class, and she displayed a maturity beyond her years. Adanna beamed with pride whenever neighbors praised her daughter's intelligence and manners. One day, Precious came home with a small trophy she had won in a school debate competition. "Mama, I did it," she exclaimed, her face glowing with excitement. Adanna hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I knew you would, my angel. You are destined for greatness." That evening, as they sat together under the dim light of their kerosene lamp, Adanna spoke of her dreams for Precious. "One day, you will stand tall and make a difference in this world. But no matter where you go, never forget where you come from." "I promise, Mama," Precious replied, her voice filled with conviction. The foundation laid. By the time Precious reached adulthood, she was a young woman with a strong sense of self. Adanna's teachings had shaped her into someone who valued hard work, integrity, and family. Though they had faced countless challenges, their bond remained unbreakable. Adanna looked at her daughter with pride and hope. She knew that Precious was ready to take on the world, but she also knew that their journey together was far from over. As Precious prepared to step into the next phase of her life, Adanna's heart swelled with a mixture of joy and sadness. She had given her daughter everything she could, and now it was time to watch her soar. "Go and shine, my Precious," Adanna whispered one evening as she watched her daughter drift off to sleep. "The world is waiting for you." And with that, the foundation was set for a life filled with promise, challenges, and the enduring strength of a mother's love. The aroma of roasted corn and fried plantains wafted through the bustling streets as Precious made her way home from her first day at her new job. The city seemed alive with endless possibilities, and for the first time, she felt a sense of purpose. She had landed a position as a cashier at the largest supermarket in the city, Megamart, a sprawling complex that was a symbol of wealth and opportunity for many. Precious's journey to this point had not been easy. After graduating with excellent grades, she had spent months applying for jobs, often receiving no response. Adanna, ever the optimist, had reassured her, "Your time will come, my child. God's plans are never late." And now, that time had finally arrived. First day at Megamart. Walking into Megamart that morning, Precious was both nervous and excited. The supermarket was unlike anything she had ever seen. Rows of neatly stacked goods stretched endlessly, and the air buzzed with the hum of activity. Shoppers pushed carts brimming with items, while employees in crisp uniforms moved with purpose. Precious's manager, Mr. Tund, was a middle-aged man with a kind face and a sharp eye for detail. He had taken an instant liking to Precious during her interview, impressed by her intelligence and humility. "You'll do well here," he had told her. "Just be diligent and respectful. Customers notice these things." Precious was assigned to a busy checkout counter, where her duties included scanning items, handling payments, and interacting with customers. Though the work was fast-paced and demanding, she approached it with a smile, drawing on the values her mother had instilled in her. By the end of the day, Precious had earned the admiration of her colleagues and even received compliments from a few customers. Her heart swelled with pride as she recounted every detail to Adanna later that evening. "Mama, it feels like a new beginning," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I want to do well and make you proud." "You already make me proud, my angel," Adanna replied, her voice filled with warmth. "Just remember to stay humble and keep God at the center of everything you do." Rising to the challenge. Over the weeks, Precious settled into her role, quickly becoming a favorite among the staff and customers. Her efficiency and friendly demeanor set her apart, and even the busiest days felt manageable because she genuinely enjoyed her work. One particularly busy afternoon, Precious caught the attention of a customer who exuded wealth and confidence. Dan, a tall man with a commanding presence, was a regular at Megamart. He had built his fortune in real estate and was known for his impeccable taste and sharp business acumen. As Dan approached the checkout counter, he noticed Precious's bright smile and calm demeanor despite the long queue. She greeted him politely and scanned his items with practiced ease. "Thank you for your patience, sir," Precious said as she handed him his receipt. Dan paused, intrigued. "You have a way of making even the mundane seem pleasant," he said, his tone light but sincere. Precious smiled, slightly embarrassed. "Just doing my job, sir." As Dan walked away, he found himself thinking about her. There was something about her simplicity and grace that intrigued him, but he dismissed the thought as fleeting curiosity. An unexpected connection. Unbeknownst to Precious, Dan had a close relationship with Mr. Tund, her manager. The two men had been friends for years, and during one of their regular catch-ups, Dan brought up the topic of Precious. "There's a girl at your supermarket," Dan began, trying to sound casual. "She's different. Polite, hardworking. What's her story?" Mr. Tund chuckled. "Ah, Precious. She's one of my best employees. Came from a humble background but works like someone with everything to prove." Dan nodded thoughtfully. "Would it be inappropriate to ask for her contact information?" Tund raised an eyebrow. "As long as your intentions are good, Dan. She's a gem, and I'd hate to see her hurt." "You know me better than that," Dan replied with a grin. Later that evening, Dan sent Precious a polite message introducing himself. Precious, initially surprised, responded cautiously but warmly. Over time, their conversations grew more frequent, and a connection began to form. Precious and Dan, building a bond. Every evening after work, Precious would sit with her mother and share stories of her day. When Dan entered the picture, she spoke about him often, her tone a mix of curiosity and excitement. "Mama, there's a customer who seems very interested in talking to me," Precious admitted one evening, her cheeks flushed. "He's kind and respectful, but I'm not sure what he wants." Adanna listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "What matters is that you take things slow and always carry yourself with dignity. A good man will respect your boundaries and your values." Precious nodded, taking her mother's advice to heart. Over the next few weeks, her conversations with Dan revealed more about his life. He shared stories of his upbringing, his struggles, and the values that had shaped him. Precious, in turn, opened up about her childhood and the deep bond she shared with her mother. Dan was captivated by her honesty and humility. He found himself looking forward to their talks, each interaction deepening his admiration for her. The dinner invitation. One evening, after weeks of getting to know each other, Dan decided to take the next step. He invited Precious to dinner at a well-known restaurant in the city. Precious hesitated. "Mama, he wants to take me to dinner. I don't know if it's a good idea." Adanna considered this carefully. "If you feel comfortable and his intentions seem genuine, there's no harm in getting to know him better. Just remember who you are and what you stand for." Encouraged by her mother's words, Precious agreed. On the night of the dinner, she dressed modestly but elegantly, her nerves heightened as she stepped into the luxurious restaurant. Dan was already waiting, his smile warm as he rose to greet her. "You look beautiful, Precious." "Thank you," she replied softly, feeling a mix of shyness and excitement. Their dinner was filled with laughter and meaningful conversation. For the first time in years, Precious allowed herself to dream of a future that extended beyond her work and responsibilities. Turning point. As Precious walked home that night, she replayed the evening in her mind. Dan had shown her a glimpse of a life she had never imagined for herself, yet his kindness and humility reminded her of the values her mother had always taught her. When she reached home, Adanna was waiting with her usual warmth. "How was it, my child?" Precious smiled, her heart full. "It was different, Mama. He's a good man. But I'll take my time to see where this leads." Adanna hugged her daughter tightly. "That's my girl. Remember, no matter what, you deserve happiness." And so, Precious's life began to shift. She had found her path, but little did she know, it was only the beginning of a journey that would test her strength, faith, and the bond she shared with her mother. The city glistened under the morning sun as Dan sipped his coffee on the balcony of his upscale apartment. His thoughts, however, were far from his luxurious surroundings. They lingered on Precious, the modest, hardworking young woman who had somehow managed to captivate him. It wasn't just her beauty that intrigued him but her humility and the unshakable sense of purpose in her demeanor. Dan was no stranger to attention. As a successful real estate developer, he had met countless women, many of them drawn to his wealth and status. But Precious was different. She wasn't impressed by material possessions or grand gestures. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that made him want to know her better. That morning, he decided it was time to make his intentions clear. A growing connection. After their dinner, Dan and Precious continued to grow closer. Their phone conversations became a nightly ritual, each one revealing more about their lives and aspirations. Precious often shared stories of her upbringing, her mother's sacrifices, and the values that shaped her. "My mother is my hero," she told Dan one evening. "She's taught me everything I know, how to work hard, how to be kind, and how to trust in God." Dan listened intently, struck by her deep respect for her mother. "She must be an incredible woman," he said. "I'd love to meet her someday." Precious laughed softly. "She's very protective. You'd have to pass her test first." Their laughter filled the air, but Dan's thoughts were serious. Meeting Precious's mother felt like a step he was ready to take. Seeking guidance. Before moving forward, Dan sought advice from his best friend, Tund, who also happened to be Precious's boss. "Are you serious about this girl?" Tund asked, raising an eyebrow. "Absolutely," Dan replied without hesitation. "She's unlike anyone I've ever met." Tund leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "Precious is special. But she comes from a simple background. You'll need to approach this with respect and sincerity. Her mother is everything to her, so winning her over will be key." Dan nodded. "I'm prepared for that. I want to do this the right way." Dan makes his move. The following week, Dan called Precious and asked if they could meet in person. This time, he suggested a quiet cafe instead of an upscale restaurant, sensing that she would feel more at ease in a less formal setting. When Precious arrived, she found Dan already waiting, a bouquet of flowers on the table in front of him. She smiled, slightly embarrassed but touched by the gesture. "These are for you," he said, handing her the flowers. "Thank you," she replied, her cheeks flushing. "They're beautiful." As they sipped their drinks, Dan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Precious, I want to be honest with you. I admire you deeply, not just for your beauty but for your character and the way you carry yourself. I'd like to get to know you better, and if you're open to it, I'd like us to build something meaningful." Precious's heart raced as she processed his words. She had sensed his interest, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel more real. She took a moment to gather her thoughts before responding. "Dan, I appreciate your honesty," she said carefully. "You're a kind man, and I've enjoyed getting to know you. But I believe in taking things slow, especially when it comes to matters of the heart." Dan nodded, respecting her approach. "I wouldn't want it any other way. I'm willing to take this at whatever pace you're comfortable with." Adanna's perspective. That evening, Precious shared Dan's words with her mother, as she always did. Adanna listened intently, her hands busy kneading dough for the evening's dinner. "He seems like a good man," Adanna said thoughtfully. "But remember, my child, not everyone who smiles at you has good intentions. Take your time to pray about this. If he's truly meant for you, God will make it clear." "I will, Mama," Precious assured her. "I won't rush into anything." Adanna nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. She could see that Precious was both excited and cautious, and she was proud of her daughter for staying grounded. Dan meets Adanna. A few weeks later, Dan asked if he could visit Precious at home. She hesitated, knowing how protective her mother could be, but eventually agreed. On the appointed day, Dan arrived with a basket of groceries and a warm smile. Adanna greeted him at the door, her discerning eyes taking in every detail. She was polite but reserved, watching closely as Dan interacted with Precious. "Thank you for having me, Ma," Dan said, handing her the basket. "Precious speaks so highly of you. It's an honor to meet the woman who raised such an incredible daughter." Adanna softened slightly at his words but remained cautious. As they sat in the small living room, Dan spoke about his upbringing, his career, and his intentions toward Precious. He emphasized his respect for their values and his willingness to earn their trust. By the end of the visit, Adanna was impressed. Though she still harbored a mother's protective instincts, she couldn't deny that Dan seemed genuine. "You have my blessing to get to know my daughter better," she said finally. "But remember, I'll always have her best interests at heart." Dan nodded solemnly. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Ma." A growing love. As weeks turned into months, Precious and Dan grew closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. Dan's consistency and respect for her values reassured Precious that his intentions were sincere. He often visited her at home, spending time with Adanna and becoming a familiar presence in their lives. One evening as they walked through a quiet park, Dan turned to Precious and said, "You've changed my life in ways I didn't think were possible. I've never met anyone who makes me feel as grounded and complete as you do." Precious smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "You've changed my life too, Dan. But I want to be sure we're building something that will last." "We are," Dan assured her. "And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that to you." The proposal is set in motion. Unknown to Precious, Dan began planning a special evening to solidify their relationship. He knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, and he wanted the proposal to reflect their unique journey. He sought Adanna's advice, knowing how much her opinion mattered to Precious. "She's simple and doesn't like grand gestures," Adanna advised. "Keep it heartfelt and she'll treasure it." Dan nodded, grateful for her insight. As he finalized his plans, he felt a sense of certainty that he had never experienced before. Precious was the woman he had been searching for, and he was ready to make her his partner for life. The evening air was cool and refreshing as Precious stepped out of the taxi. She adjusted her modest yet elegant dress, her heart racing with nervous anticipation. Dan had invited her to dinner at a restaurant she had only heard about in passing, a place frequented by the city's elite. It felt surreal to think that she, a simple cashier, was about to dine in such a place with a man like Dan. The restaurant's entrance was adorned with glowing lanterns, and the faint melody of live jazz music floated in the air. As Precious stepped inside, the opulence of the place momentarily took her breath away. Chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, and the tables were draped in crisp white linens. Dan was already waiting for her at a table near the window, the city lights shimmering behind him. He stood as she approached, a warm smile lighting up his face. "You look stunning, Precious," he said, pulling out her chair. "Thank you," she replied shyly, her cheeks flushing. She sat down, feeling both excited and slightly out of place. An evening to remember. Their conversation began slowly, but as the evening progressed, Precious found herself relaxing. Dan had a way of making her feel at ease, his charm balanced by a genuine interest in her thoughts and experiences. He asked her about her job, her aspirations, and her life with her mother. "Your relationship with your mom is inspiring," Dan said, his tone thoughtful. "Not many people have that kind of bond." Precious smiled. "She's my everything. She's sacrificed so much for me, and I owe everything I am to her." Dan nodded. "It's clear that she raised you well. Her strength is reflected in you." Precious blushed at the compliment, but before she could respond, a waiter arrived with their food. The dishes were beautifully presented, and as they ate, they shared stories and laughter, their connection deepening with each passing moment. Toward the end of the evening, Dan leaned forward, his expression serious. "Precious, I want you to know something. I've met many people in my life, but none of them have impacted me the way you have. You're different. You're real. And I want to build something meaningful with you." Precious's heart skipped a beat. She looked down at her hands, unsure of how to respond. When she finally met his gaze, she said softly, "I feel the same way, Dan. But I've always believed in taking things slow, especially when it comes to matters of the heart." Dan smiled, his respect for her growing even more. "I understand, and I'm willing to take things at your pace. You're worth the wait." Sharing the news with Adanna. When Precious returned home, Adanna was waiting for her, as she always did. She was seated in her favorite chair, a Bible resting on her lap. The warm glow of the kerosene lamp illuminated her face as she looked up with a smile. "How was it, my child?" Adanna asked. Precious sat down beside her and took a deep breath. "It was wonderful, Mama. Dan is different. He listens, he cares, and he respects my values." Adanna studied her daughter's face, noting the excitement and uncertainty in her eyes. "He sounds like a good man," she said carefully. "But remember, my child, love is not just about feelings. It's about actions, sacrifices, and shared values. Take your time and pray about this." "I will, Mama," Precious promised. "I won't rush into anything." Adanna nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, let's thank God for the blessings He's bringing into your life." They knelt together, their prayers a mix of gratitude and guidance. The second date. A week later, Dan invited Precious to another dinner, this time at a quieter location. He had arranged a private setting in a beautiful garden adorned with fairy lights and soft music. The atmosphere was intimate, and Precious felt a sense of peace as they talked. Toward the end of the evening, Dan took her hand, his eyes filled with emotion. "Precious, I've never been more certain about anything in my life. You've shown me what it means to find joy in simplicity, to value things that truly matter. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Before Precious could process his words, Dan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a delicate diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Precious's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the man kneeling before her. She thought about her mother's teachings, her dreams, and the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "I'll marry you." Dan slipped the ring onto her finger, and they both stood, embracing under the twinkling lights. For Precious, it felt like a dream, a moment she would cherish forever. Preparing for the wedding. The days following the proposal were a whirlwind of activity. Precious shared the news with Adanna, who was overjoyed but also emotional. "My child, you've grown into a beautiful woman. I prayed for this day, and God has answered my prayers." As preparations for the wedding began, Precious insisted on incorporating elements of her culture. She wanted the ceremony to reflect her roots and the values her mother had instilled in her. Dan agreed wholeheartedly, respecting her wishes and working to ensure the day would be special. The traditional engagement ceremony, known as the introduction, was held at Adanna's home. It was a vibrant affair filled with music, laughter, and cultural rituals. Dan and his family came bearing gifts, symbolizing their respect for Precious and her family. Adanna watched with pride as her daughter was celebrated, her heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. The wedding day. The wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. Precious looked radiant in her traditional attire, a mix of modern elegance and cultural heritage. Adanna, dressed in matching colors, couldn't hold back her tears as she watched her daughter prepare for the ceremony. "You look just like your father would have imagined," Adanna said, her voice breaking with emotion. "He would be so proud of you." "Thank you, Mama," Precious replied, embracing her mother. "I wouldn't be here without you." The ceremony was a beautiful blend of tradition and modernity, attended by friends, family, and colleagues. As Precious and Dan exchanged their vows, Adanna silently prayed for their happiness and strength, knowing that this was the beginning of a new chapter for her daughter. A new chapter begins. After the wedding, Precious and Dan settled into their new life together. True to her promise, Precious invited Adanna to live with them, a request Dan readily agreed to. "She's family," he said simply. "And family comes first." Adanna moved into their home, her presence a comforting reminder of Precious's roots and the values she held dear. As they began their life as a family, Precious felt a deep sense of gratitude for the love and support that had brought her to this point. Little did they know, their journey together was only beginning, and the challenges ahead would test the strength of their bonds and the lessons they had learned. Hello family, I hope you enjoyed the story. Part 2 is loading. Watch out for Part 2, my dear family. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.